So good evening. We'll discuss test 1 and 2 today. I think this is pending. So we finished AST 3 and 4 the week before this. This week we will wind up AST 1 and 2. Of these, first test, AST 1 is an introductory test. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense wasting our time. So we'll try to finish this in 30 to 40 minutes and we'll spend more time on second test, because in second test we have more substantial and more conceptual questions. So first test, I'll try to give you a rough outline of how to write, and frankly speaking, a lot of these questions are also repetitive in nature, given the fact that the syllabus itself is very narrow in these areas. So for common questions, I'll give you common outline and we'll try to quickly wind up first test and we'll spend more time on second test, right? So the first test, first question is relevance of anthropology. So first question and seventh question are similar. First 7 and also 8 to some extent. This is about what is anthropology, what is its relevance, how is it being used. In fact, 1 and 7 are almost quite similar in how you approach them. So first, we'll go with 8th. Define anthropology. So take any one major definition. If possible, take the definition given by E.B. Tyler. And when you're talking about sub-branches, try to draw a diagram. There are two famous diagrams. You can draw, I'll share the PPT on the group after the discussion. You can draw a diagram like this or a diagram like this, which shows different branches and what each of these branches is trying to do. So essentially, what are the branches? 4 major branches: sociocultural and biological, linguistic and archaeological. So 1, 2, this is the first. Yes, this is ethnology or sociocultural anthropology, and then biological, physical anthropology, archaeology and linguistic anthropology. And you can elaborate, draw this, and in each area you can also talk about the sub areas. For example, in linguistics, what are the sub areas? In this picture, they're showing historical linguistics and structural linguistics. You can talk about biological anthropology and the sub areas. One is human paleontology. Human paleontology is primates, fossils, and evolution. And then human variation. Human variation is ecological anthropology, epidemiological anthropology, race, racism, growth and development. All of those come under human variation. Likewise, archaeology, what is the focus? And in every area, you have a parallel theme. Applied anthropology is not a separate branch. Applied anthropology is like a inbuilt layer in every field. In each of the 4 major areas, you can have applications. That is applied anthropology. This is one way to depict. Another way to depict the same thing is this diagram, which shows cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, archaeological anthropology, linguistic anthropology. And applied anthropology is seen as a common theme in all the sub-branches. And inside this showed that another way to understand any branch is research area and methodology. That is another way to look at this. So in fact, I would prefer this diagram. This is from Ember and Ember. It's much more simpler. So that's how you can define anthropology. When defining anthropology, please also write. I shared one PDF on the group about this definition features. Define and then discuss the basic features, essential features of anthropology. Essential features like holism, comparative approach, historical approach, these are some of the unique features of anthropology that set it apart. And also field work. fieldwork. These are the things that set anthropology apart from every other area. So define it, discuss the features, and take any major branch. Generally try to take the major branches such as sociocultural or biological, and talk about each branch, what are its sub areas, and what is its scope, what are its applications, and what is its relevance. That's all. That is how you can discuss 8. Next, 1 and 7 are again quite similar. Relevance of anthropology, or critically examine the role of anthropology in contemporary societies. These are questions which are very, very analytical. So see, there are two kinds of questions: analytical questions, conceptual questions. You should learn to differentiate these two in the papers. What are conceptual questions? For example, the questions we discussed in last test 3 and 4, band and tribe, horticulture, they are conceptual in the sense that it's very clear what you must know for a given topic. You can't really innovate. Whereas things like relevance of anthropology, critically examine the role of anthropology in contemporary societies. These are examples of analytical questions. Or if you take questions like, for instance, in paper 2, you have a lot of analytical questions. Discuss social change in tribal societies, or discuss the impact of tribes under Christianity, or these kind of questions. These are analytical questions, meaning that there is no fixed, like essay. Essay is an example of analytical questioning. For these areas, there is no fixed set of right answer and wrong answer. You can, as long as you write in a lively way with examples, and as long as you can substantiate it with reasonable amount of arguments, and it seems very relevant, it is good enough. So in analytical questions, you can take some liberty for originality. In conceptual questions, you can't be original. In fact, it is wrong to be original, because you must discuss what the concept is. So this 1 and 7 are analytical questions. So just broadly discuss them. So in fact, if we discuss 7, 1 more or less gets covered. So what is the role of anthropology? Again, take the various sub-branches. What is the role of socio-cultural? What is the role of biological? What is the role of archaeological? And what is the role of linguistics? In each area, how does it help in the present? Socio-cultural, so ethnocentrism, human rights, tolerance. You can discuss the role in policy making, role in, I've given you some themes in the paper itself: role in management in corporate world, role in policy making, role in businesses, and role in academics. So you can discuss all of that in sociocultural. Like biological anthropology, how can we use it to understand the past, understand fossils? How can we use this to help us understand pandemics? You can take the example of COVID, for example, and see during COVID how understanding people and their immunity levels helped us better target our vaccination efforts. All of that you can discuss under physical anthropology. Likewise, linguistic anthropology has a lot of scope, because it's a subject that is still evolving. So here, by understanding language, again, see how we can use this to understand the past of the language, how we can understand hidden meanings in language, and how we can use study of linguistic anthropology to improve our non-verbal, what's wrong with this? To improve our understanding of non-verbal communication, to improve the history, how various languages evolved, and to understand how there are social aspects to language, or to understand how culture impacts language, language impacts culture. Here you can talk about Sapir-Whorf hypothesis and all of this. And archaeology helps us to improve our understanding of the past, especially of societies. Especially archaeology is relevant for its understanding of proto-history, like IVC. These kind of societies where we are still trying to get a clear picture of how life might have been. So in that sense, take different themes and discuss the relevance and applications of each of these areas, and if possible, add case studies. of how anthropology is being used in the present. Now, where do we get case studies for topics like this? In fact, the case studies for this topic and case studies for 9.1 in paper 2, that is 9.3, I'm sorry. Role of anthropology in tribal and rural development. For all of these, there is no correct answer. You just need to support your answer with good case studies. Where do you get these case studies? In Ember and Ember, the best, I will share another book also, but Ember and Ember is one book. In Ember and Ember, there is a chapter towards the end. It is called Practicing Anthropology. It is called Practicing and Applied Anthropology. In that chapter, you will find a lot of case studies of anthropology being used in to improve vaccination, to help solve deforestation, to improve school enrollment, anthropology being used for rehabilitation and resettlement. A lot of case studies are given in that chapter from across the world, not just India. So we can use that as a good set of case studies to write for questions like 7, questions like 1, and also the questions you get in paper 2, role of anthropology in rural and tribal development, right? So that's all. And in the end, discuss critique. So we said critically examine. So also talk about any possible criticism. Talk about possible criticism or issues in anthropology. Issues like ethical issues, ethics of intervention. Can anthropologists use their knowledge to change people? Or by generating knowledge, are we using this knowledge for the good of society or not? Or is knowledge being used by corporate or corporate groups to get their agenda on people? Is it being used for acquiring land and displacing people? So what is the purpose for, and issues like privacy of the group we are studying? So these kind of ethical issues you can raise to say that it is one thing to study them, it is another thing to know how these studies and to what end are we using this knowledge. That's all. Broad description in different areas with case studies, and finally concerns. How anthropology, if we don't use it properly, can actually end up harming the very people that we are studying. So that is 1, 7, and 8. Next, another set of common questions are 2 and 6. 2 and 6 are also again common, isn't it? One is about anthropology and history, the other is about, I think, I shared a very good PD because most of you are taking some content for this from some or the other toppers notes and this, and you don't have clear-cut clarity on what to write for this. So I shared a document. I think I shared one document, this on the course group, where you have comparison of social anthropology with many social sciences, anthropology and sociology, anthropology and psychology, and it is relationship of social anthropology with allied disciplines. So from here you can take the content for anthropology, sociology, and anthropology and history. You need not study for many, just study anthropology, sociology, anthropology, history, economics, political science. These 4 are enough. And lastly, anthropology and policy and governance. So when you are writing these kind of questions, you need to try to make sure you cover the various dimensions. For example, if you take 6th question, compare anthropology and sociology. How do you compare them? What are the dimensions that you must touch in this comparison? First, scope. Second, methods. 3, subject matter. 4, sub-branches. And when I say compare, you need not always discuss only differences. You can also add similarities. Comparison does not have to always mean differences. You can also write similarities. So, scope of anthropology and sociology. Anthropology is studying largely simple societies. Sociology is studying mostly urban societies and also some rural societies. But anthropology's focus is largely on tribal and village simple societies. And in terms of scope, anthropology studies across time. That is, we are studying man from the past, but sociology is largely interested in the present day issues of man. Sociology is not interested in past, and sociology's focus is mostly on urban sections and some rural sections. So in that sense, anthropology's scope is much more wider because we are studying simple societies especially, and we are interested in a large period of timeline, whereas sociology's focus is largely on the present. That is another important difference. Then methods. Sociology uses methods more like schedules, questionnaires, and some case study approaches and interview approaches. But anthropology has unique methods such as field work and participant observation. That is unique to anthropology. And subject matter, or in addition, and sub branches. In anthropology, we have different sub branches. We discussed the 4. Whereas sociology, the sub branches are not so clear cut and distinct. And in terms of subject matter, both are trying to do holistic study. That is, both are whole sciences, holistic sciences, or both are not part sciences. Both are called whole science. That is, they're trying to understand society or man in complete sense, political, economic, social, and different senses. So both share that framework. And then discuss the Indian context. In India, how did these two branches evolve? In India, both sociology and anthropology evolved as sister disciplines. That is why in many universities, social anthropology and sociology are generally in the same department. So they evolved as sister disciplines. And in India, both have shared, for example, while anthropology specialized in tribal studies, sociology specialized in caste studies. That is the one difference, but it did not stop there. Many famous sociologists did tribal studies, like Virginius Kaka is a sociologist. Many famous anthropologists did caste studies, like M.N. Srinivas. So in India, these two subjects do not have like a clear-cut, distinct sense, like my boundary ends here, your boundary starts here. In India, both of them evolved simultaneously. So you can draw a diagram and show. Draw like this, and or in fact, show this is sociology. This is Anthro to show its larger scope, socio for its limited scope, and this is social Anthro. That's how you can compare. History also is similar. In fact, history is very clear cut. History is only interested in past, doesn't study present. Anthropology studies present as well as past. History is interested in the study of only societies with literature or societies which have written texts, whereas anthropology study is interested not just in history but also in proto-history, prehistory. Anthropology is also interested in unlettered societies, illiterate societies like tribal segments and rural segments. That is not the focus of history. History largely relies on only literary and archaeological evidence. Anthropology is not like that. Anthropology uses field work and participant observation. And in India, again, discuss the story. In India, history and anthropology evolved quite differently. History focused more, you can draw a timeline. This is around 2550 BC. History begins here. But anthropology, fine. Anthropology runs the whole length. It starts from the first Homo species all the way. Whereas history's focus is largely limited to present. But similarly, just like we showed a diagram for sociology and anthropology, we can also show a diagram for history and anthropology. The common thing that they both share is archaeology. If this is history, if this is anthropology, then the commonality that they both share is called archaeology. Clear? So, and then how do you situate anthropology in social sciences? Here we can say anthropology is a part social science, part physical science, because anthropology also involves diverse areas. The hallmark of anthropology is diversity. So it involves social science subjects like social anthropology. It also involves physical science subjects like biological anthropology. And different from both these, it also includes linguistics and archaeology, which do not fall in social science and physical science segment. So again, for these kind of questions, draw a diagram. So and show this is, for example, sociology. This is biology. This is anthropology. That is, it is a part of socio as well as biological sciences. Clear? So that is how you can handle question number 2 and 6. Then we finished 1, 2. We will take 3, 4, 5 together. Or okay, since we anyway began discussing this, let us discuss 9, because 9 is also related to sub branches and all of this. We'll finish 9 next and then cover all the others. What is 9? 9 is about linguistic anthropology. So first define it. This is study of language from a cultural and evolutionary point of view. What is linguistic anthropology? The focus of study of language from cultural and evolutionary point of view, and discuss and link linguistic anthropology is connected to another theoretical approach in anthropology called as cognitive approach or cognitive anthropology, and it is connected to the study of emics and ethics. So all of this is actually part of linguistic anthropology, and discuss any important thinkers. Who are some important thinkers? Harold Conklin, Stephen Tyler, Derek Bickerton, Paul K. They are all some of the important figures in cognitive approach, cognitive anthropology. We can list out them. Then we talked about discuss major branches. This is very, very easy. Just there are 3 major branches. We talk about, right, mention what are those 3 and then discuss what each of them involves. So what are the 3 major branches? Descriptive linguistics, or it is also called as structural linguistics. That is a study of language from its structural viewpoint. What are the different components and subcomponents of language? That is what we mean by descriptive linguistics. And then we have historical linguistics, that is the study of how languages change over time. And finally, we also have something called as socio-linguistics, that is study of language from a social or and cultural point of view. Descriptive, historical, and socio-linguistics. And now discuss each of them in detail. What is descriptive linguistics? Descriptive linguistics studies three things: phonology, morphology, and syntax. What is phonology? How language sounds are made. How should you pronounce something? That is called as phonology. What is morphology? Morphology is how do you arrange these words, or how do you arrange different sound sequences to arrive at meaning? That is called as morphology. And lastly, what is syntax? After having sound and after putting letters together to create a word, how do you arrange different words together to, for example, tenses, or creating active voice or passive voice? Those are examples of how do you bring different words together to create a meaningful phrase or meaningful line. That is called as syntax. So we are descriptive linguistics or structure. It is also called as structural linguistics. It studies basically how these three things work for any given language. How do you arrive at the right sound in each language? How are they taking care of sounding? How are they taking care of morphology? And how are they trying to manage the syntax? That is descriptive linguistics. Next, we have historical linguistics. Historical linguistics is something that deals with the evolution of language, how language has evolved. Why this is important? Because by understanding how language evolved, or understanding the similarities between different languages, we can understand ancient migratory patterns. For example, how do we know that there was Aryan migration? How can we prove Aryan? One way to prove Aryan migration theory: if languages of Germany, languages in India, and languages of somebody in Central Asia. So yes, how do you prove that? So today you study language of North India, study some languages in Germany, study some languages in Central Asia. If all of them have some structural similarities, in all of them, for example, if the morphology and syntax is same, what does that mean? Exactly. Well, how do we use language to prove migrations? Because language development takes lot of time. Language development or language growth takes a lot of, yes, language development takes a lot of time. So because it takes a lot of time, it can't evolve in like 100 or even 500. It takes thousands of years. So if distant languages are familiar, have similarities, what does it show? It is proof that at some point of time, all those people are descendants of a common ancestor. That is how we can prove migration. So, for example, this chart here shows how different languages, if you take all the world languages and arrange them into families, you will get this kind of a family tree for the world languages. So if you see, these are all Indo-European languages. And these are Germanic. Within Germanic, you can break them down into for Scandinavian. These are examples of Scandinavian. And then English, Dutch, Flemish, they are another family. Likewise, here, Hindustani, Urdu, and Bengali, they are part of Indo-Iranian branch. So if you take all the world languages and organize them into a, based on their structure, if you organize them, you get this kind of a tree. Interestingly, you will see that Armenian languages are not very distant from, or Persian is not very far away from Hindustani, it is Hindi. So this is how historical linguistics studies basically the past origins of language itself, and then how the present day languages are connected to each other, how present day languages are related to each other. That is historical linguistics. Then we have social linguistics. So social linguistics helps us understand how language helps in understanding, for example, things like, let's say, social status. For example, how in men and women you can have how we can understand status, how the elite people speak the same language, how the masses speak the same language, how, for example, you can have men and women can have differences in terms of how they use the same language, in terms of what they speak, what they don't speak about, what kind of words they use. All of this can have gender differences. And then we can talk about how in multilingual societies, is there any hierarchy of languages? For example, today, let's take India today. Which language is, if somebody speaks English and somebody is speaking Telugu in the same room, do you make any judgment about their background? The person who has spoken English is generally seen as more polished or well-read or well-bred. Whereas somebody speaks in Telugu, then you assume that maybe he is a village guy. So how are you able to make a judgment? Because English is seen as a language of elite. Telugu is seen as a local language. So based on the language, we are judging also. When there are multiple languages, the language of the dominant society emerges as a dominant language. So we generally look at West as a superior society. So when somebody speaks in Western language, we think they are naturally having higher status in our society also. That's why elites speak only in English these days. They write Telugu also only in English. They don't write Telugu in Telugu. So this is how social linguistics tries to understand different aspects of language. Clear? So that is linguistic anthropology. Now, let us also discuss 10. 10 is more conceptual. Then we'll quickly wind up 4, 3, 4, and 5. I think we'll be left with 3, 4, and 5 only after that. 10 is about discuss the use of comparative method in anthropology. For this question, most students do not write a very good answer. A lot can be improved for this particular question. So first, define comparative method. What is comparative method? Here, we try to compare different cultures to identify their similarities and differences so that we can categorize them and arrange them in an order. And comparative method, step by step. First step is, whenever you talk about comparative method, who should come to your mind? Classical evolutionists, because classical evolutionists like E.B. Tylor and L.H. Morgan and Tylor used comparative method to arrive at their different stages of culture, that is savagery, barbarism, civilization. All of this was arrived at based on comparative method. So classical evolutionists use comparative method very well. Then Franz Boas, he criticized this. Franz Boas said that no, these people, yes, Franz Boas said classical evolutionists, they wrongly used comparative method. He argues that these people are comparing wrong things. They are comparing present day societies and assuming that they resemble extinct societies. They are comparing present day hunter-gatherers and saying they are savages. They are comparing present day horticulturalists and calling them barbaric. They are looking at present day farmers and calling them as agriculturalists of the past. So he points out that the present day agricultural societies are not a resemblance of Neolithic farmers. The present day hunter-gatherers are not a reflection of Paleolithic hunter-gatherers. Why? Because first, present day hunter-gatherers have also undergone cultural change. Second, almost 20-30,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers were there everywhere. Today, where do you have hunter-gathering way of life? It's a marginal life. You have hunter-gatherers only in deep forests or in hilly regions or in deserts. You don't have them living in Hyderabad, right? Hyderabad, you have hunter-gatherers? We don't. But at one point of time, even here you have hunter-gatherers because that is the only mode of life. Hence, he says they wrongly used comparative method, and he points out that comparative method also did not pay attention to unique aspects, unique histories. They do comparison, they compared existing phenomena without studying their past. So in class, we talk about how, for example, clans can happen due to fission or fusion. Two societies can have clans. Classical evolutionists will look at this and say, see, both of them have clans. What does it mean? It means both are in same stage. But what if in one of them, clans formed because lineages fused, whereas in another, clans are formed because tribe broke down into small groups. So just because they have clan, can you assume both are same? No. So we have to pay attention to the background or historical process in which culture actually evolved, and these people did not pay attention to that also. That is how Franz Boas said these people wrongly used it. Then Marvin Harris finally comes in support of comparative method. He says it is true that classical evolutionists wrongly used it. He supports comparative method. It is true that they wrongly used it. But that doesn't mean the method itself is flawed. Comparative method is good in anthropology, provided we use it carefully. Provided we use it carefully. What does he mean by using with care? He thinks that you have to first use it in a limited way. Make limited comparisons and don't make sweeping comparisons. Second, pay attention to history. Pay attention to unique histories, and also pay attention to the differences. Pay attention to the environment, role of environment. Then make limited, apply it in a limited way to make limited conclusions. Then comparative method could work. That is how Marvin Harris supported it. Marvin Harris is saying comparative method itself is not wrong, but the way in which it was used by classical evolutionists is wrong. So if used correctly, he says comparative method is good. Conclude with Marvin Harris. So three things. First, what is it? How classical evolutionists used it. Second, Franz Boas's critique of comparative method. Lastly, Marvin Harris's support of comparative method, and conclude by saying that comparative method today we can use it beyond sociocultural anthropology. We can use it in biological anthropology, archaeological anthropology, and also in linguistic anthropology to draw certain limited conclusions. We are using it in biological anthropology, for example, to study human variation, to compare fossils. We are using it in archaeology for cultural comparisons. In linguistic anthropology, to compare languages. So you can say all of these are the different ways in which comparative method can be used. Clear? Next, 3, anthropology and colonialism. Now, this is again a very broad and analytical topic. There is no fixed right answer for this. Here, discuss the origins of anthropology. How anthropology originated in the 19th century under the conditions of colonialism. Under the conditions of colonialism, anthropology took birth in 19th century because at that time, as colonial empires were being built, anthropology was needed to study different cultures who were being brought under these mighty and large empires. That's how anthropology initially started. Then talk about Indian context. Even in India, anthropology started with the setting up of the Asiatic Society of Bengal by William Jones, and the idea was to help colonial state take roots in the country. But then we can add a twist by saying that though anthropology had colonial roots, it did not completely work as a colonial enterprise. Anthropology then developed on its own. Then talk about the work of S.C. Roy during colonial rule, how he worked for the benefit of many tribal people in India, like the Orans, Mundas. Then most importantly, discuss the work of Elvin. Elvin is a classic example. He was sent as a colonial agent, but eventually he took the side of the weaker tribal people and fought for their rights against the colonial enterprise, and then discuss the role of anthropology in the post-colonial period. After decolonization, everywhere anthropology was used to now help these newly independent nations to take strong footing. For example, in India, when India became independent, we needed anthropology to do village studies so that we can take up developmental programs in rural areas. So that is how anthropology initially has a colonial origin, but it did not confine itself to being a colonial enterprise. It began to develop in its own way with its own direction. And that's how anthropology eventually took the side of people. That's it. Next is, how does anthropology help in management and corporate world? For this also, I shared a document on the Telegram group. You can go through that to get more details. But let me give you a brief picture. So when you come across these kinds of questions, you should learn to use some keywords. Learn to use some keywords like the business anthropology, or industrial anthropology. Learn to use words like business anthropology and industrial anthropology. These are the words that you can use. So the study of businesses, the use of anthropology in management and corporate enterprises leads to what is called as business anthropology and industrial anthropology. In businesses and industries, where do we use anthropology? We use anthropology primarily in 4 areas: marketing, then we use it for improving the organizational culture, we use this for product development. That is, you want to make new products. Then you need to understand what people want. You need to understand them given their culture. Four, we can also use anthropology in international trade and international business. Because whenever companies go for globalization and expansion, then they have to deal with other cultures' norms. For example, take McDonald's. Elsewhere, McDonald's, its burger is famous for beef. But in India, when they came to India, they realized you have to pay attention to the local people's cultural sensitivity. So what did McDonald's do? It recast the whole thing. That's why you won't have beef burgers or pork burgers in India. If you go to China, they have burgers made out of pork. If you go to the West, you'll have a lot of these burgers, hamburgers made out of beef. But in India, they sell mekalu tikki. You won't find this anywhere else in the world. So, for example, that's an example of how whenever businesses want to expand, they need to understand local culture and sensitivities to revamp their strategy and accordingly create new products for the country. And then explain this with some case study. Here I use a case study of how General Motors, this is the company that owns Chevrolet brand, they in the 1980s hired anthropologists to help improve their organizational culture. So when they hired an anthropologist called, where is this man? Bridie, Elizabeth Bridie. He was hired by General Motors in the 1980s because at that time General Motors is an American company that was coming under heavy competition from Japanese car companies like Toyota, Honda. So to improve its profitability, they hired this man and to tell them what to do so that they can improve their work culture. And he studied them and he showed that in General Motors at that time, there was a lot of groupism, or he pointed out that there is excessive individualism. That is, people are working in terms of me, what is my contribution and what is my output. That's all. There is no collaboration mindset. So he found out that people are mostly focused on productivity of an individual, and rewards and blames were assigned to individuals only. So individual was the unit. They were not thinking in terms of teams, collaboration, knowledge sharing, or skills sharing, none of this. But everybody said they wanted, ideally we want to have a culture of collaboration. But what they had on the ground is a culture of individualism, and they themselves were not aware of it. Only when he did a study and he realized that that whole department, the leadership was very seen as authoritarian, not democratic. So workers were not comfortable going and telling their managers their problems because they feared punishment. So then these researchers, they designed 10 tools, and they said, you use these recommendations, when if you apply them, then the whole organization will, work culture will change. And when General Motors took these recommendations of Brady, then it led to increase in profitability. And not just that, the injuries, illness, all of them went down in the factory floor. So you can use this case study as an example of how anthropologists' help is being used in business and corporate world. This is one case study. You can add many more case studies if you want. This is a very famous case study, right? That is anthropology in management and corporate world. And say in the future, as companies become more and more global, like Google, Facebook, we have these high technology companies which are drawing talent pool from across the world. If you go to Google's office in California, you will have global workforce. So as increasingly global workforce is being hired by companies, you need to have mechanisms where you can manage this cultural diversity. You need to have mechanisms where we create such culture of collaboration and teamwork. Now, it's not easy for an African man to collaborate with a Chinese and with a European man, all three in the same team. So how do you create a work culture where all can work together? That is something anthropology can offer. So that is anthropology in management and corporate world. Just case studies and discuss in these 4 areas, and start with keywords like the use of anthropology in these domains is called business anthropology or industrial anthropology. Next, last question in AST 1 is, we have to be quick. I thought we'll finish in 30-40 minutes, but I think we took nearly 1 hour for this. We have second test also. Yes. So paleogenomics. What is paleogenomics? It is the use of genetic tools for paleontological studies. Use of genetic tools for paleontological studies. What are paleontological studies? Studies of fossils. And what do they use? They use something called as aDNA or ancient DNA. Paleogenomics uses something called as aDNA or ancient DNA. And who made this paleogenomics popular? Dr. Svante Pabo. He was in news. He got Nobel Prize in Physiology in 2022. So last year's Nobel Prize in Physiology went to a person of anthropology, that is Svante Pabo, who is the founding figure of paleogenomics. And then discuss how you can discuss the work of Dr. Svante Pabo himself, how he used the ancient DNA to help us understand. Using that, he reconstructed Neanderthals, and using that, he explored the African origin theory of man, and he studied when humans left Africa and so on. So that is paleogenomics. And in paleogenomics, what do? We take aDNA, or it's called ancient DNA, is called as A DNA. We take A DNA and ancient DNA is amplified. How do we amplify ancient DNA? Through something called as PCR, polymerase chain reaction, and then they establish libraries. They establish DNA libraries. One library is called single strand library. Another is also called as double strand library. And once you establish this library, you can then study the similarities in DNA sequences to understand the past of the DNA. That is paleogenomics. This has become popular because of the Nobel Prize that was given to Dr. Svante Pabo last year. Right? So that concludes AST 1.